Good day. I'm the director at QAhatesyou.com. You might think that you're done testing your web application because you've used your test cases and test checklists to ensure that the user can't get into any trouble or enter any bad data using the controls on the various pages in the web application. But you might not be done. You might not have covered everything, not unless you've targeted the query string. And that's what we're going to talk about today on the 2-Minute QAte. Now, in part of talking about the query string, we are going to talk a little about the URL, that's the Uniform Resource Locator, the web server name and page where things are. Secondly, we're going to talk about parameters that are passed back to the server side along that URL up in the address bar that the application then consumes to do whatever processing it needs. A lot of applications use those parameters for context, user ID sorts of things, and unfortunately a lot of applications don't test that data. That is, they don't check to see that the parameters are correct format or to make sure that the user is only reviewing context that he or she should have. And so we're going to talk a little bit about breaking the application passing bad junk on the query string. And secondly, we're going to talk a little bit about making sure you have proper context. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about testing the URLs themselves to make sure that you're not exposing your organization or your server to some simple problems. The first thing I want to talk about is passing along bad values along the query string. Now, this testing is quite like any edit box control type testing where you do boundary analysis, you do the Hamlet test, try to make sure that you can't enter too big of a number or letters into a parameter that's expecting only numbers or that sort of thing. Well, for an example, let's take a quick look here at the SQA forums. I hope they don't mind that we're going to use them as an example. Now, the SQA forums website is a bulletin board. That means it has lots of query string parameters up here. We want to make sure that if you put in a big number that's non-existing, it doesn't blow it up. Doesn't blow it up, I give that a pass. You also want to make sure that if you put in a bad data type, for example, it's expecting a number here, give it a letter, I call that a pass. Not going to get the user into trouble, not going to get the website into trouble. Now, when you're performing that sort of testing, you don't actually have to know what each parameter on the query string represents. As a matter of fact, who cares as long as it doesn't break the application? Throw a stack trace, spit out some database tables for you to see, or at least the names thereof. Now, with another web application that has logins or that sort of thing, something that's much more important is making sure that the user cannot manipulate the query string to see another user's data. So let's take a quick look at that. Now, this is an email view as web page on the email provider's website, and it does not use a regular query string in the URL to pass its context. It uses directory numbers. Now, if you were to alter the number of this first directory, you would see a different flyer entirely. If you were to alter that second number, you would see a different email address as far as who's subscribed. That's not preserving context correctly, and as a matter of fact, it is exposing just a little bit of data out there that your web application should not be sharing. Now, this is a portal here run by a bank for Yamaha. And you'll see that there are redirects and whatnot on the query string. Now, what struck me about this one is that if you alter the account ID, suddenly you're looking at a different skin here. I would hope that this is not necessarily going to
show the user a different user's account or a different bank's account or that sort of thing. But unfortunately, I have seen payment portals where changing the user ID in the query string does, as a matter of fact, show you someone else's data.
And that, my friends, is why I don't pay my bills on the internet. Also, it's a little hard to trade pelts for your firewater on a computer. But aside from the difficulties in my life, let's talk a little bit about testing the URL itself, aside from the query string. Now, graybeards like me remember the old days where the www dot prefix was not assumed. That is, there was a lot of other traffic on this here internet they were telling us about. ftp.mysite.com was different from www.mysite.com. Servers out there are still configured to not automatically go to the web server if you just type the domain name. Strange as it may be, in the 21st century, try typing the URL without www and make sure it goes to the right place. Also, check to make sure that the ftp.mysite.com doesn't resolve to a strange unknown FTP server hanging out there asking for trouble. Additionally, regardless of whatever your home page is configured to be, you might want to check some default page names like index.htm or index.html, your basic PHP home pages, that sort of thing, to make sure that they're either not accessible or are properly accessible, as the case may be. So, there you go. That's a little bit closer to the 2 minutes I promised you. So, consider the query string when you're testing your web applications, and make sure that the user can't get you or himself into trouble with it. I'm the director at QAhatesyou.com. Have a great day, making it a bad day for someone else.